The Cobra is here in World of Tanks, and by God is this thing pretty disgusting within World of Tanks, and that is because this tier 9 British medium tank has the possibility of doing 2,000 damage if you combine its clip potential, and that is because of these Hesh rounds that the tank featured, and we're going to see these throughout this replay. Let's jump into some action. Now today's replay focuses on Strong Maxi here, and he's going to be having a replay that is the highest that I've seen on the What Replays website, and we want to really showcase what this tank can do in this sort of matchup where you're coming up against a lot of tanks that, to all intents and purposes, don't have 120mm of armors if you can hit them in the right places, and that is of course in places like the lower plate of the STB1, and that's because you have 120 alpha with this tank, but you have such a short intraclip reload. You've got a 1.5 second shell delay between the shots, which means within 4.5 seconds you could have dealt 2,100 damage there or thereabouts. I think it's just over that 2,060 actually, which is amazing. For a tier 9, that means that any tank that you come up against can pretty much be one shot, or one clipped I should say, by this tank, which means that this, if you can play it correctly, can be devastating. Now, yes, you do have a 48 second reload if you take that base, well, just under that, but that means that you're spending a long time reloading. But in the sort of scenario where you can kind of just go up and take out an STB1 very easily, yeah, there's not really any problems. Now what you're seeing Strong Maxi here doing is taking a pretty nice position for this tank. The tank doesn't have terrible turret armor. If you've ever played the Caliban, I guess, it has that sort of similar sort of turret armor. It's not nothing fantastic, and you definitely will be able to take quite a few hits, but it can push out a lot of damage, and you can see there within 1.5 seconds the enemy chieftain had taken 1,000 damage, and that is standard with this tank. Now what you're seeing here is kind of the problem with the tank is that after you've fired your shells, you can be somewhat useless, albeit yes, you can spot for your team, yes, you can do all of the extras, but it can be a little bit boring in between your shells. But that kind of limits the tank from being able to have huge results. But because this tank is so good, and because it has all of the aspects of a kind of auto-loading tank that you want, then this thing can be really, really fun to play. And you might think, yes, it has such a long reload and you have all of the negatives that come with having such a long reload, but the key thing about the tank, however, is that because this tank can be using these Hesh rounds that we talked about with 120mm of penetration, this means that you're not actually that limited, and it means that you can have 2,400 DPM on this medium tank at tier 9, and that's not including any extras that you put on this tank that can boost up that. Obviously you can't use rammer because this is an autoloader, so it doesn't work, but key thing with this is that you can increase that just slightly, which means that you are going to be able to probably reach around the 2,500 DPM mark, which isn't awful, but it's certainly not the best that you're going to be seeing. But the thing is with this tank is it's all about effective DPM, and this tank has that in abundance, because once you have fully reloaded, you can smack this damage out so easily. And because they're Hesh rounds, even if you bounce around, you can still deal damage. Yes, there are some scenarios where that might not be the case, but when you're playing up against Leopard PTAs, yeah, you're not really going to bounce at all. And now then, in this kind of game, he has picked up 5,500 damage, and that is a very good result. And I guess that for the most part, if you can play this tank pretty aggressively to the point where you can fire off all of your rounds but then take a little bit of time to reload, then it can be really, really good, and really, really beneficial for you to play it in that way. It's not really one of those that's going to do well if you try and snipe at the back where you're using predominantly your spotting mechanics. Yes, you can do that in kind of these higher tier games where you feel like you're going to be under a little bit more pressure, but yeah, in this sort of scenario where you're kind of needing to get forward and get damage, then that's exactly what you're going to have to try and do. AE phase 1 on the enemy team isn't really looking, but he does have a TNH that's pressing him from above in their cap circle. So he has to be very careful. If he can catch this AE phase 1, not looking, because of the 1.5 second intraclip reload, you can smack out some damage very, very quickly. Now, if this AE phase 1 decides to YOLO him, it could potentially be the end. But you're seeing what he does here is make a smart play. He decides to reload his clip. Now he decides to actually not load a HE clip. He's going for the heat rounds within this tank, and that is kind of a smart play. However, because these are pretty lackluster in terms of the amount of damage that these can do, only 360 alpha per shot, meaning that you take a significant decrease in your clip potential when you load these heat rounds. But it is necessary sometimes to be able to guarantee damage as opposed to just bouncing off some of the heavily armoured tanks. Now for the AE phase 1, because he is on such low hit points, and as you move towards the later half of the game in this tank in particular, then you are able to load the heat rounds because you don't need the pure alpha damage. You're more about being so consistent. Having done 6.6 thousand damage, he's going to be very, very happy, and that makes him in the top replays within this tank, at least to begin with. As of the release of this video, there could be potentially a game where someone manages to pull off, 12,000 damage, but even then, you're limited very much by the amount of rounds that this tank has. It isn't infinite. You cannot just dump a ton of rounds with this thing. You do have to be a little bit careful. You're seeing actually that he decides to load the HE or HESH rounds again in this vehicle, and that is because what you have to do is be very mindful that you don't want to get caught out on the reload, and when you're firing up against the tortoise, you need to make sure that you catch the rear of the tortoise to be able to pen consistently with the 120mm of penetration. Luckily for him, he does catch the ass of the tortoise, and unfortunately he misses a ton. But what it does do now is allow him to be able to fully clip him if he had a full clip's worth of HESH rounds left. Unfortunately he doesn't, but so he needs to land this last hit point worth of damage on the tortoise. However, the tortoise is deciding that he doesn't actually want to turn and face the opponent that is going to be able to finish him off more consistently, and so he's kind of trying to angle towards the this tank right here. Unfortunately, it's not going to work out too well for him. He is going to hopefully take the shell from Stronk here, and hopefully that goes well. Now he decides that is not the play. It's time to run away. The TNH TVZ51 is deciding to come towards him. He is not going to be able to clip him all in one go, and having done 7,211 damage, he really needs to make sure that his team are going to help him in this replay if he wants to succeed. So he has to be a little bit of a hit point kind of trade for his team, and if he can do that, then that will be perfect. However, the TNH is deciding to go after the T22 medium, which is not particularly the best thing for him. He needs to make sure that he supports him. Now if he can get up behind this TNH, then he can secure at least around about 1200 damage, if not just a bit more. He may even be able to fully clip out this TNH if he rolls average, and if he can do that, that'll be perfect. Then the Leopard 1 on his team will be able to kind of push forward and deal a bit of damage. He opts for going for the Foch 155 here. Unfortunately, he misses one, and he goes for two more into the TNH's side, which is perfect. And having reloading now 50 seconds for just one shell, it's really important that the Leopard 1 doesn't just YOLO in. He needs to make sure that he kind of waits for his team, albeit Stronk here to push in, and then he can kind of really help him out. Now the TNH puts one shell into the Leopard 1, which is not ideal, but he's now going to push. He's going to turn the TNH from moving, and unfortunately for him, the Leopard 1 doesn't appear to make a kind of brash approach. He rams the TNH, just trying to keep him in place, and then the Leopard 1 kind of comes from behind, and having got this much damage so far, he places the last round into the rear of the TNH VZ51, bringing his grand total up to 8,556, and hopefully this gave you a good indication as to what the Cobra in World of Tanks is really like. Do you think that the alpha damage is too overpowered for a tier 9 vehicle, being able to clip out pretty much any tank it meets at its same tier, and most tier 10s, if they are a medium or a light tank, it can also do the same? Let me know in the comment section down below. Like, subscribe if you haven't already, and check out these videos on screen which cover the Object 279E, everyone's worst, and of course than the AMX M454, which of course was a world record beating replay. So check those out and I'll see you there. Goodbye.